As a wild-haired, fiery-spirited, empathetic and determined individual, it is only understandable that I have a long-lasting obsession with Anne of Green Gables. As a kid, the Anne of Green Gables trilogy was one of my most prized possessions, and I watched these movies back to back over and over again, resulting in Anne informing a lot of my fashion and character choices as a kid and young adult. It's safe to say that Anne has been one of the most impactful fictional characters of my life, so as an ode to my puff-sleeved wearing kindred spirit, I wanted to recreate one of her outfits today. Also, yes, my hair is straightened today, but usually it looks like this. So please accept me into your wild-haired community club. Thank you very much. In the first movie, someone asks Anne how she's going, and she says that she is well in body, but considerably rumpled in spirit. And not only is that a very funny thing to say, it's also exactly how I felt when I was trying to organize all of my ideas and inspirations for this project. So I was very fortunate to be able to turn to my favorite organizing tool and the sponsor of today's video, Milanote. Milanote is a tool for organizing your creative projects. I'm currently using Milanote to help me plan my Anne of Green Gables costume recreation project, and because Anne has such iconic style, it's been pretty difficult to whittle down my ideas of what look to recreate, and being able to gather all of my points of inspiration in one place has been super helpful in helping me get some clarity and vision to begin my project. It's such a great tool for fashion designers and creatives like myself because you're able to bring your ideas to life in a practical format in a way that feels intuitive. On my main board here, I was able to curate a group of images that capture the vibe of Anne of Green Gables, so I was able to understand the colour story that I wanted to achieve in this project. I also have a to-do list for the project, a video discussing the costumes from the 1985 movie, and some subboards including hair inspiration, very important for an Anne costume, and a board detailing all of my favourite Anne Shirley outfits. Well, not all of them. There are many missing, but these are some of my favourites. Here is my iconic Anne outfits subboard, which highlights the selection of outfits that I've been considering recreating. I've grabbed a bunch of screenshots from the film and just dropped them straight into the board so I can see different views and angles of each look. And I also added some notes discussing thoughts I had on particular details and a video for reference too. I love that I can add notes, images, videos, tasks, to-do lists, all in one place. It's extremely practical. It's also super quick and easy to add photos from various places online using the Milanote web clipper. You can save the images and links directly to the board, making the whole process efficient and delightful in my opinion. You can also drag and drop right from your desktop too, which makes it effortless to add all of my screenshots from the movie straight into my boards. Milanote has over 100 built-in templates to use for every creative project. To get me started on my hair inspiration board, I was able to use the fashion mood board as a starting place, and then I was able to customize it from there. Whether you're a fashion designer or a sewist like me, Milanote makes starting a new project easy. And when the time comes that you're ready to share your work with a colleague, a client, a friend, or a group assignment team to get feedback or to collaborate with them, it's not a hassle at all. You can collaborate in real time by sharing your board with others. Like here, for example, I asked my boyfriend and trusted sewing advisor for his opinion on which outfit was his favorite, because as I said, it was impossible to decide alone. Prior to Milanote, I was quite partial to letting my ideas and inspirations for projects just float aimlessly around in my head until I forgot about them. But because of this fantastic tool, I've been delighted to organize and plan my projects in such a straightforward and workable format, and as a result, I've been able to see my ideas and inspirations come to life. Finally, Milanote is available for free with no time limit, and if you enjoy using Milanote, please let me know. I would love to hear about it. Sign up for a free Milanote account using the link in my description. I hope you enjoyed this tool as much as I do, and thank you so much to Milanote for sponsoring this video. Let's get into the project. I asked my followers on Instagram which Anne outfit I should recreate, and the majority said this outfit here, which also was my favourite. However, after doing a bunch of planning and deconstructing and thinking about making this, I realised it might be a little bit of a stretch for my technical capability right now, so I think I'm going to bookmark this for a later date, as it is one of my all-time favourite Anne outfits. And instead, I'm moving towards a slightly more simple project, and it's this look from the first movie, which is kind of like a simple dress and a pinafore over it when Anne is climbing the top of the church and she falls off the roof. I like this outfit a lot because I feel that I can make a modern interpretation of it so that I can wear it and enjoy the spirit of Anne Shirley on my day-to-day. A wearable Anne Shirley outfit is great to me because I'm not a historical clothing girl on the day-to-day as much as I love it. So I made sure to try and design something that had the same energy but could also translate into 2024. I want to make an oversized blue dress with a gathered skirt, a wide hem and some wide cuffs, and a little button closure at the back. And then to match it, a lovely pinafore with side pockets and inverted box pleats right at the front. I've been hardcore debating whether I want to make this pinafore fully enclosed at the back so I could wear it as a standalone piece. But there's something about this little split that I find quite endearing, so we'll see as we progress. I bought this beautiful bluish, navyish checkered quilting fabric. It's 100% cotton. And it's lovely. And although I wanted to buy white cotton drill, it was all sold out at my Spotlight, so instead I opted for this greyish, light bluish cotton drill, which I think is really cool. And I feel like these colours are friendly with each other. And they're reminiscent of what Anne wears in the movie. As for notions, I've got navy thread and a few of my grandma's vintage buttons that she gave me. I'll decide on which one I want to use later. I can finally start now. And with that, it's time to begin. I'm excited because I've been planning this for so long. I saw Bernadette Banner using wrapping paper as a pattern making paper, and my life has changed forever. It's so long and lightweight and easy to cut, yet sturdy enough to use. And you can write on it, no notes. Excellent. Affordable? Wonderful. I've got my pattern pieces now, so I'm gonna make a little toile and see how they fit together because I don't want to mess up my nice pretty fabric. Very responsible. Too small. Too small. Infinitely better. I just have to do a sleeve. That's a pretty good sleeve. I think I want a really nice thick cuff, so I'm just gonna mark that. I'm gonna take out all my basting stitches and transfer my adjustments from the calico to my paper pattern. And then I can start making this for real. After I self-drafted that sleeve, I actually went through my pattern making for fashion design textbook and started reading about how you're actually meant to draft a sleeve, and it's quite fascinating. I think I better just do a video soon where I just literally draft up a bodice block and a sleeve and just learn how to do it because it's actually fascinating. Also, if you want to learn from textbooks, I just found this resource online called Internet Archive. Found it again through Bernadette Banner because she's just incredible. And you can just sign up for a free account and there's basically a huge library of resources from all different aspects of life, but there are a lot of fashion textbooks on there and you can rent them out for free. Heaps of historical books as well, which is pretty cool to preserve that information. Oh, it's heavy. Don't need to buy one. Literally online on their database. I saw it yesterday. I was like, whoa. Okay, time to make this. That's where the bodice needs to go in order for things to align. This is one of my favourite finishes of a back of a dress I've ever done. I actually learned it from the garden dress pattern by Frock Studios, and basically it's a French seam at the bottom and then you kind of tuck your seam allowance in at the top so everything is fully encased and it looks gorgeous. If this doesn't really help you at all, you might want to have a look at the pattern. It's a beautiful, beautiful pattern and great explanation, but basically I did a French seam up into my notch and then I cut into the notch a little bit so that my seam allowance at the top would kind of fold out like you can see here, and I stitched all the way down and past that by about 1/8 of an inch. And that means that you have this excess fabric here you can tuck under and under again, kind of like you would a hem, and you can stitch that down, and it has a little bit of a pointed stage at the bottom. Hopefully you can see in a future clip, but basically everything is nice as encased. It looks beautiful and it feels luxurious too. Like, are you kidding? That's so delightful. I'm not sure if I mentioned, but I did decide to do French seams as my finishes, so that means just pinning everything wrong sides together. Immediately after pinning, I realised I am not going to be pattern matching today. I am a villain. Also, I love French seams. I love them. I would say I much prefer yarn dyed fabric over this quilting fabric, which has a white sort of backing and then the print is just on one side. Like, yes, visually this gingham is so beautiful. I couldn't pass on it. But when I'm stitching through this fabric, some of that white backing kind of comes through to the front because you've pierced those tiny holes. And yeah, it's like a really small detail, but it still makes me a little sad. So a yarn dyed fabric is just when the fibers of the fabric are all dyed separately and woven to create the pattern. Often those sorts of fabrics would be more expensive in my experience. I just find that gingham looks a little nicer when it's woven together to create the pattern, rather than the pattern being printed on it. For example, I have some linen here that's yarn dyed. Let me show it to you. Hopefully you can see, but if I pull it apart, you can see each of those fibers is individually woven together and they're all colored differently to create the pattern. Fascinating stuff. Maybe it's just nature's way that I'm not ready to purchase really expensive fancy fabrics until I can pattern match. Maybe that's the skill I need to master in order to progress to the next level. Lol. I just filmed a whole clip of me doing the French seams, but then it was out of focus. So yeah, I did my French seams, which is a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then you fold it in half, and then it's another 1/4 inch seam allowance, which equals your 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then everything is encased and beautiful and pretty. That's the wrong side, and then the right side will look as normal. Do any Australian sewists use the imperial system? I don't know when it started happening for me, but I prefer imperial when I'm sewing, with a tiny little drizzle of metric system. Let me know in the comments. I think I'm going to do the skirt next to accommodate for my next biggest piece of fabric, and then I can do all the other bits after. I want to budget enough fabric for my skirt. Feels important. I very much so struggle to know how gathered to make skirts, and I often err on the side of over gathered, which I think looks really cute but makes things slightly less wearable because they're heavy and you have to kind of pile them on top of yourself when you get into a car. So I want to try and keep it restrained and not go too gathered. My bodice is about 22 inches on just the front, so it's going to be about 44 inches circumference. I could double it and do 88 inches. I might do double and a half. I might just go for roughly an 100-inch skirt circumference and see what happens. The length, I roughly guessed, is going to be about 33 inches long. I'm just trying to line it up so my selvage is perfect so I don't have to waste any fabric. Give myself a little bit of extra room to play with. Now it only felt appropriate to do pockets for this dress. I feel Marilla would have. This looks fine. And for that reason I proceeded with pockets, and French seamed ones at that. To do a French seamed pocket, you pin your pocket wrong sides together and stitch it down at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then trim the seam allowance to 1/8 inch, press that seam allowance to the pocket side, then fold the pocket over so it's right sides facing now. You can pin it if you like, or you can freelance it like me and stitch it down at a 1/4 inch. I like to understitch that, or I guess I top stitched it here, but basically I'm top stitching that seam allowance to the pocket side so that it flips really nicely into the dress. Then I French seamed all of this seam, so that's wrong sides together, all the way down the top, all the way around the pocket, all the way down the bottom. And then what do? Trim the seam allowance to 1/8 inch, you know the drill. Then you can fold all of that so it's right sides facing, give it an extremely good press so everything lays nice and neatly, and then stitch that down at a 1/4 inch. To get those French seams really nice and neat, you just have to be pedantic about the seam allowance and it will turn out beautifully. My pockets are French seamed, and now I just have to gather the top portion of the skirt so I can attach it to the bodice. French seams are unnecessary. I just feel like they're quite a luxurious finish for garments that you intend to wear a lot and for a long time. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. One of my favourite scenes from Anne of Green Gables is when Anne asks Diana if she's going to be taking the Queen's College extra curriculum class after school, and Diana says, "Oh no, my mum thinks I should focus on learning how to run a household instead of poring over books." And Anne just looks at her and says, "Oh Diana, I feel as though you've tasted the bitterness of death." It's so good. To attach the skirt to the bodice, I sewed them right sides together in between the two gathering stitch lines. Then I overlocked the seam. I decided not to French seam it because I thought it might be a little bit bulky, and I ended up pressing that seam allowance up towards the bodice and giving it a good top stitch. Okay, this is my first try on and I'm loving it. It feels really cute. The fabric is such a win. The only thing that I'm feeling silly about right now is that the dress is so simple looking, but I've spent quite a long time making the finishes really nice on the inside. I don't regret that, but when I look at it, I'm like, girl, you could have whipped that up in an hour or two, but it's fine. I think I'm just going to take a little bit off the hem, maybe like 1 inch, and maybe a tiny bit off the collar and a tiny bit off the sleeves, just making them a bit larger and a little bit less on my shoulder, more like that. Of course I will have to amend my sleeve pattern, but it'll be worth it. Okay, time for my hem facing. To make the hem facing, I have these rectangles that make up the circumference of the bottom of my skirt. I'm going to sew them into a big loop, and then I can use that to finish off the edge of the skirt. I think I want to incorporate the selvage edge, which is this sort of self-finished, beautiful tassel-y edge. I've never incorporated that before, and I'm not sure how I feel about it, but I feel like Marilla would use a selvage edge because it would be efficient. For some reason, every time I'm making a decision, I just keep thinking, what would Marilla do? Which is hilarious. Oh, Marilla, if only we could talk. But for real, I really do want to talk to her and every other character in Anne of Green Gables if they were real and portrayed by the people that I am familiar with. Anyway, here's me doing my hem facing. I understitched it so it would lay nice and flat. I pressed it up so it would lay nice and flat, and I top stitched it down so it would lay nice and flat. We want it to be nice and flat. And of course, if you didn't have a selvage edge like this, you would just tuck that raw edge under, and that would finish off your hem facing just like that. Well, I actually just drafted a little bit of a new sleeve pattern, and why do I kind of like it in the contrast print? It fits, but I don't like this. It looks good like this, and when I go like this, it has this slight, I don't know if you would call it bunching, it's just kind of like, it drapes like this. And I watched a few troubleshooting videos, and I'm not quite sure how to fix this. I'm also not sure if it's a problem. I think that's something that happens when you make your own clothes a lot, is you start looking at stuff and you're like, is that what clothes look like? Is that normal, or is that problematic? I'm not sure. Let me know. It fits anyway. I should probably just proceed. Like, if I just pin some of that excess fabric out of the way and make my pattern again, I wonder if that solves the problem. After this, I'm definitely going to do some investigation into fitted sleeves. I'm fascinated. I proceeded to cut out my sleeve and French seam the side seam closed, and then I also did a French seam to attach it to the bodice. At this stage, I'll also trim my seam allowance down to 1/8 of an inch. I can then pull the sleeve out, and then you have to tuck it all the way in and give that a good press. And then as best as I can, I'll sew a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance all the way around this armhole. After sewing in the sleeves, it was then time to finish the neckline off using some bias tape. I've made a little loop out of some very small bias binding, which I sewed in half and then flipped right sides out, and I'm just making sure that my button can pass through, which it can, so I can sew this onto the binding now. I just tacked that little loop onto the end of my bias binding, and then I folded that binding over and then over again so it all lay on the wrong side of the bodice, and I stitched that down. Now I just have to decide which button to go for. Obviously the navy really blends in, but there's something kind of nice about a little contrast sometimes. Anyway, the dress is done. It's kind of beautiful, except you guys are going to hate me. I think the sleeves are uncomfortable. There's something about the way that I drafted them where they're really just pulling in the back. I think that maybe my armhole was too high of a curve and there's just not enough room to move. So I'm going to quickly run to Spotlight, see if they've got more of that fabric, and give it another go. I just have to. It's okay. I'll probably finish this tonight, so I'll see you guys then. I decided on and sewed the button, and it looks quite good, but I did also unpick the sleeves. I proceeded to buy 3 more meters of this fabric so I could perfect the sleeves, which is important, and as that fabric is washing right now, I'm going to start work on the pinafore. And yeah, I thought about not doing a pinafore, but it just feels like an Anne of Green Gables staple, so it must occur. I'm going to do my best to try and recreate this pinafore as best as I can. It looks fairly simple, like the back and the front yoke piece are the same. It's got a square neckline, 3 inverted box pleats at the front, and 2 inverted box pleats at the back. 2 buttons, top stitching. I basically just used my bodice block to make a really rough shape that resembles the top portion of Anne's pinafore, and now I'm going to cut that out twice for the front and the back. Basically this is my front yoke piece, and then I have the exact same but cut in half with a little bit of seam allowance in the middle there for the back piece, because we'll have a button opening at the back. I'm just going to cut these pieces out one more time so that I can use that as my like facing or lining or whatever. Listen, I'm speed running this pinafore. Basically what I'm going to do is wing it. Big time wing it. I'm hoping I can just use the width of my fabric, cut it to the length that I want, and then do my 3 box pleats. And if I have any excess fabric hanging off the edge of my top yoke piece, it's getting cut right off. I'm not doing any maths. I'm doing only figuring it out on the fly. It's gonna be fine. Like, that seems to be the right vibe. Inverted box pleat, inverted box pleat, inverted box pleat. I just have to make them more even. I'm hypothesizing that the top stitching goes down probably around 10 centimeters. Maybe 9 is nice. I top stitched the pleats down on either side of them at a 1/4 inch seam allowance using my presser foot as a guide. I did a tiny little triangle arrow thing at the bottom, which was kind of just from the picture of Anne, and I also top stitched all the pleats down so that they lay evenly. This is the front. I think it's really good. I haven't quite figured out the armhole situation yet or how this joins to the back. Future problem. I have to say I'm such a fan of the inverted box pleat. I feel like it is a beautiful design element. Whenever I use one, I'm like, oh, very pretty.
Yes, now, I feel pretty nearly perfectly happy.
I measured and constructed the inverted box pleats the exact same way that I did the front of the pinafore, and once I had sewn them all together, I started working on the actual bodice yoke section. I basically just sewed 2 of the exact same yokes together all the way around the inside edge of the collar to finish the neckline. Then I trimmed that down to 1/8 of an inch, flipped it right sides out and gave it a good press. Probably isn't the best way to do this, but what I've decided to do is not burrito the sides just in case the middle portion of the neckline and this little bit here. What I want to do is just fold this seam allowance in by about 1 centimeter, give it a press, and then just sandwich this back portion in between these 2 pieces. It's a little bit of a rough technique, but I think it gets the job done. And it looks nice and clean on both edges, which is what I was after. There might be a better way to sew this together, I'm not really sure, but I actually found this to be a very effective way of joining the 2 pieces together in a way that was clean. And once I had done that, I just trimmed a little bit of an armhole shape into all of the sides of the pinafore so that they would fit together. I've got to French seam the side seams, add the pockets, buttonholes, buttons, hem, pinafore. Oh yeah! Oh, and I must top stitch and finish the armhole. So it's actually a few more steps than I initially entailed, but not a problem. Please enjoy the obligatory videos of me hemming the pinafore and top stitching said pinafore as well. A dinner is served. I always feel intimidated when it's time to do buttonholes, I must admit, but I shall persist. Even though I've done navy top stitching all throughout, I've decided that I'm going to be doing my buttonholes in a matching thread because I don't really want them to stand out. I sewed my buttonholes on and I also hand stitched my buttons on. That's one of my favourite things to do. Hand stitching buttons is just 1 billion times more effective than machine stitching. And then I proceeded to prepare my pockets. I folded over the seam allowance 1/2 inch on all 3 sides and then 1.5 inches, or probably a bit more than that, on the top edge. I top stitched that top edge down so it was all ready, and then I attached both pockets on either side of the pinafore, and you will see where I positioned them later, but basically I just winged it. All I had left was the most measly amount of scrap fabric, so I had to cut my bias tape in these little like 6-inch strips. It's cruel and it's nasty, but it does give me the opportunity to practice my bias tape joining skills. You craving that diagonal join? Right angle it. Oop, flip it on the diag. Stitch it. Flip it. Obviously I'll trim that seam allowance, but yeah. Right angle. Diag. Stitch it. Trim it. Flip it. Slay. Oh my goodness, everything is done. I feel like sewing tonight was a little bit of a fever dream, so I do apologize if the second half of this video just kind of got a bit wacky, but thanks for staying with me for the vibes. I'm kind of in love with both pieces. It was so worth it taking the sleeves out and redoing them. I think a big problem was just that there wasn't enough room in the arm, but now I feel like I can move and dance, which is very important. It's literally 2 a.m. now, so I'm gonna sign off. I hope you liked the video. Thanks for hanging out with me. If you want more content from me, of course you can subscribe and see more stuff on YouTube, but you can also find me on Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, Patreon, and my website where I make happy handmade things. I can't wait to show you the finished product. I'm really proud of it. It feels like it's definitely Anne of Green Gables inspired and reminiscent of one of the outfits she wears in the first movie, but also it feels very wearable and something that I can get lots of enjoyment out of in my own personal life. I will show it to you in 1 second, but before I go, please let me know what your favourite Anne of Green Gables movie is / favourite scene. That's all. If you're still watching, you are my bosom friend. Thank you for being here. I'm sending lots of love and I will see you in the next video. Bye!